How real is this humanoid robot future? Building robots that can walk, live, think, and probably even kill.
The agrarian revolution, that took 1,000 years. Industrial revolution, about 50 years. Computers, 30 years. ChatGPT grew from 0 to 100 million users in 60 days. AI was going to displace blue-collar labor. The inverse has happened. The white-collar laborers are the ones being replaced. It's absolutely inevitable that humanoid robots are going to start to displace physical labor. On the other side of this, people are creating a ton of value. You can be scared of the future, but you don't really have a choice. You have to embrace it.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to Fortunate Fishes. My guest today is Will Summerlin, a legit tech wizard who basically has been living in the future since he was a teenager. This guy skipped college, built an AI startup, raised $10 million, and sold it all before I think he could legally rent a car. He then became an AI teammate at Lyft. Then he worked at Cathie Wood's Arc, and now he's the co-founder and managing partner of Autopilot, a venture firm putting serious money behind next-level technologies, everything from advanced AI to humanoid robots. He's one of the sharpest minds in tech. Please give it up for Will Summerlin. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, very, very kind intro. Excited for our conversation.
You skipped college, sold your startup at 22, worked with Lyft, Cathie Wood, and now you're betting on AI robots that could replace half the workforce. Are you building the future or breaking it? And are you the good guy? Or are you the Bond villain in this story?
It's a great question. Well, fortunately, I'm not the one building the future. I'm just investing in people who are smarter than I am, who are building the future. It's funny, though. There's like this existential debate. I think for a while, the view was that tech was kind of harmless and like it was all net good. And then you had this wave of sort of lashback at social media where people said, hey, maybe this isn't great for society. And now with AI, it's this topic of debate in every conversation. You know, is this a great thing or a bad thing? I think it's kind of funny if you look at history, any period of like rapid technological advancement has always been debated. You can go back to even the agrarian revolution, which really fundamentally changed the way that society operated. We went from a hunter-gatherer to a farming society, and that was a net positive overall. I think quality of life improved. People died less of hunger. And what's really interesting is you had two different societies. You had those who adopted new technology, the plow, et cetera. They thrived in large part because, one person became capable of producing enough food for 5 people. And so what did the other 4 people do? They became blacksmiths, they became professional soldiers, and they sort of modernized their society. And then you had tribes that refused to adapt or were not capable of adapting, and they just got dominated by the societies who modernized. And so I think it's one of those things where you can be scared of the future, but you don't really have a choice. You have to embrace it. I think, that's sort of where we're at with AI. Like net, it'll be a positive, but there will be some downsides, but I think we just have to embrace it, with open arms.
Everybody's talking about AI. You can't, meet anyone that hasn't heard of AI, but I posit to you that only 1% of people actually really understand it. And you've said that AI is bigger than oil, the internet, or even mobile phones. I've heard you talk, and I've seen also some adoption of like where the internet was, how long it took, and how fast AI is changing everything. I know a lot of the big tech companies reported this week and just astronomical, but how do you explain to someone that really doesn't get it how big this is?
I think you can break this down into 3 elements. The first is the technical capability, what AI is able to do. The second is opportunity size and how that is going to change the sort of fabric of society. And then third is the rate of adoption. You start with the first. We've gotten to a point now where these models are able to automate many of the cognitive tasks that humans are paid to do. And they're able to do these tasks not only as good as humans, but in many domains better than humans. You can look at an example like AlphaGo, which is almost old at this point, a few years old, where DeepMind, which is a division inside of Google, trained a model to play the best Go player in the world. And people thought Go was a game that was impossible for computers to win. And they trained this model and it beat the best Go player in the world. And then everybody said, wow, computers are getting more capable. And that was big news at the time. But you fast forward to today and you look at something like full self-driving. Tesla has a full self-driving system that operates the similar way that humans do, and that it uses vision to sort of interpret the world, uses neural networks that are very similar to how the human brain operates to interpret that data and make decisions. And they've driven about 1 billion miles in full self-driving mode. And statistically, it's 6 times safer than human drivers. So you already see examples across different domains of AI being as good or better than humans. And when you look at a leading indicator like software engineering, these models are roughly as good as a junior software developer at Google, but they're getting better at a much faster rate.
And that's a $300,000 job probably getting replaced by what, like $200 a month, 20 a month?
Exactly. I mean, one of our portfolio companies is an AI coding startup called Replit. And there are kind of 2 crazy statistics I'll share. This technology is very much market expanding. And so there are about 25 million professional software developers in the world. But now with AI, you don't need to be a professional software developer to create software. You can go in and work with the model and have the model write the code for you. So Replit has 40 million users on their platform using AI to create software. So there are more people building software on Replit than there are professional software developers in the world.
I've been using Microsoft Word, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and I'm working on a novel. I got to take every chapter and make it a separate file. And in each chapter and each scene, I have to say how many words. This take me a freaking week to do.
Yeah.
So I go into AI and I say, hey, you're an expert on Microsoft Word. How do I do a macro to do this? Here it is. Go there, hit F11, copy paste, close it, hit F8, hit run. And I'm like, oh, well, it's screwed up. Oh, we didn't name a folder. What folder do you want to put it in? Okay, blah, blah, blah. And then I think, well, what if I want to label them with a title that's not the actual title, but it's about something in that, so I could easily look at it and know what the chapter was about. Oh, I can do that too. Just give me the 92 titles that you want. I'll save them under that title in the folder. Went back to ChatGPT, loaded it up. It gave me the titles, gave it to the thing. And literally within half an hour, once it corrected a few errors, it's done something that I could never. The macro was like 6 pages long that you had to copy paste into Microsoft Word.
You see the power of it, but that's also an example of why we're so early in the cycle. Like, the logical user experience should be that you go into a tool like Microsoft Word and just explain in plain English what you want to happen, and it should take the actions for you. The fact that you have to go to ChatGPT, ask the questions, take the instructions, go back to Microsoft Word, manipulate the user interface there. We're so early in the cycle, and I think that's a great example of it.
I could go to Replit, and this could be like my test case, and say, hey, Replit, I am not a power user of Microsoft Word, but I am designing my novels on so I want to design a software program where you're a power teacher of Microsoft Word, and you're going to teach me everything that I could potentially do to make life easy for me and my editors.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about this now. It's almost like every human on earth has a professional software developer sitting next to them, and you can just tell that developer what you want them to build, and they'll go build it. And I think in investing in technology, a mistake a lot of people make is thinking about new capabilities simply as replacements. It's like, well, AI is just going to replace software developers, but that's it, right? We're not going to end up with more software, which is, I think, the totally wrong way to look at this. And a lot of new technologies, you see massive market expansion. You can look at like Tesla and electric vehicles. And if you looked at Tesla in the early days and you just assume that, electric vehicles was going to be a stagnant market, then you were going to make a terrible investment. You look at Uber the same way. If you think of Uber as just a replacement for taxis, like, that's not a super compelling market. But if you look at how Uber has expanded the market of rideshare, well beyond what taxis ever were, like, that's where you get these incredible venture opportunities. And I think that's what we're seeing in many domains. Software engineering is one of the first, where now anybody can create software without knowing how to write code. You just go in and explain in plain English what you want the product to do, and AI agents will code the entire thing for you.
Right. It does help, obviously, if you know how to code, because what I found is that there'll be errors, and you got to know how to it'll say you can debug. If you had some basic understanding of coding, the questions that you would ask would be a lot more intelligent than what I would ask, right?
I think what we're seeing is like a bifurcation and the tools. You have tools that are for professionals and tools that are
Right.
for non-professionals. And if we use coding, just because we're already talking about this, there are tools like Cursor that are designed specifically for professional software developers. And the way you interface with Cursor, the way you communicate with it, the questions you would ask it, it sort of expects you to know how to write code, right? Replit is designed, and other tools as well, but Replit is designed for non-professional developers. So somebody who doesn't understand the code base and the user experience is optimized for that user persona.
Now, a couple of months ago, we had talked about Replit, and had they had any new software updates since like last 6 weeks or so?
They've had like a dozen new updates in the last week. There's a cool sort of story. Amjad, who's the founder,
Is he Romanian or Hungarian or
he's Jordanian.
Jordanian? Okay.
Yeah, but he's incredibly hardcore, and it's sort of you see a little bit of Elon characteristics. Like, we're investors in XAI, and the prior firm I was at, Arc, was an early investor in Tesla, and been around that ecosystem for a while. And you hear all these crazy stories from early employees, about how hard sort of Elon drove the companies. And Amjad is sort of that way as well. They have jujitsu mats in their office
Oh,
and like
shit.
weightlifting racks. And he put the office like 40 minutes outside of San Francisco in like a sleepy town. And the idea was like, if there's nothing else to do other than like work, people are going to come to the office. They're going to work all day. They're going to eat dinner at the office. They'll lift and do jujitsu, and then they'll keep working. And so the velocity at which they're executing has been super impressive. And so yeah, they're releasing new features every couple days.
So I could go to Replit and say, Dan Brown, when he writes his novels, he has like 7 editors: a managing editor, a line editor, a developmental editor, religious editor, blah, 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 blah. I want you to create software for fiction writers that don't have all that stuff. Give them all the ideas. You're a fiction writer with 30 years of experience and an editor. What would you design into the software? And it
Yeah,
would probably give me all the features, right?
100%. Yeah. There's a great workflow that I've developed. I use Replit just for fun all the time and to build some tools for our firm. And like, I'll go into ChatGPT and I'll have it, or X, or Grok, and have it create a product requirements document for everything I want the software to do. And I will literally just copy that and paste it into Replit, and let Replit run with it and create that software.
So it's called a product requirement document.
Yes. In a traditional technology company, like Lyft, for example, I led a couple, product areas at Lyft, and typically a product manager would go figure out what you need to build, and then they would create this document called a product requirements document, which would lay out the problem that you're solving, the features, the release milestones, the metrics that you're going to monitor, and what you care about. And then you would take that to your head of engineering and say, hey, go, and your designer, and say, hey, designer, go mock this up. Hey, engineer, go build this. And typically, it would take, depending on the complexity of the feature, 4 or 5 weeks to 4 or 5 months for that iterative process to sort of run its course. For the designer to come up with mockups, the engineers to spec it out, everybody to debate and actually build this. And what's so cool now is you can literally go into an LLM, have it draft this PRD in 5 minutes instead of taking 5 days, and then you can go and create that software in a matter of minutes. So that process has been rapidly shortcut.
Right. So you create that document first, then you put it into Replit. Now with Replit, is it better to get a paid account, I would assume, than free?
Yeah, they allow free users, so they have agent credits. So agent is the feature that actually writes the
Right.
code for you, uses AI. You can experiment with agent with a free account, but you pretty quickly burn through those free
Right.
credits.
Right.
And so if you want to build a real piece of software, you would convert to paid and use the paid version.
Well, I'm gonna play around with it this time for sure. Can you talk about how quickly the internet scaled versus what's going on with AI? Because people don't realize the speed magnification.
I think this is one of the things that's sort of overlooked. There is this view that all technology cycles are net positive and they happen slowly and you can reallocate labor and all that. I think the reason why that not might not be as true in this cycle is just the pace at which it's permeating across society. If you look at prior super cycles, go all the way back to the agrarian revolution, since we started there, that took place over 1,000 years. And so you had many generations. You had plenty of time for people to learn new skills beyond just hunting and gathering. If you go to the industrial revolution, it took about 50 years for the steam engine to become the primary source of power in factories. And so it took 1 to 2 generations. If you look at computers, it took really 30 years for most businesses to start using computers as like a primary tool. And if you look at the internet, you had to build a physical infrastructure for the internet to work, right? People had to buy computers at their home. You had to lay, connectivity infrastructure. And so it all took a while, right? And so it was really a 20-year cycle. Even mobile, it took a while for people to get phones. The thing that's different about AI is the end user does not need to acquire new hardware. It's bits, not atoms. And you can access bits instantaneously from your computer or for your phone. So if you look at ChatGPT as like a leading indicator, ChatGPT grew from 0 to 100 million users in 60 days. They've very quickly grown, well beyond that.
And how long did it take the internet in comparison?
It's a great question. I actually don't know how long it took to go from 0 to 100, but it was certainly longer than 60 days.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so this is happening very quickly. And if you look at the underlying revenue growth of some of these companies, it's really shocking. I mean, I'll share Replit. This is what they've said publicly. They started the year around 10 million in ARR, and they hit over 100 million in June. So they went from 10 to 100 in 6 months. Without disclosing where they're at now, I will say that growth rate is persisting, right? So they're continuing to grow at 2,000% year over year, over 100 million in revenue. And they're not the only ones. I mean, you look at Cursor. Cursor very quickly grew to 500 million in revenue. Anthropic, we invested in Anthropic when I was at ARC. We did their Series C. It was a $5 billion valuation, and they were pre-revenue, which people thought was insane. And it felt insane at the time. But, I think we sort of saw the opportunity for scaling walls and all that. Replit has since gone, that was in 2023. They've since gone on from 0 to reportedly 5 billion in ARR. Now they're raising a $170 billion valuation. And they think that they're going to hit 9 billion this year. OpenAI was at 10 billion in June, and they just reportedly hit 12 billion. They think they're going to hit 20 billion this year. And so like the growth rates are just unprecedented and like nothing we've really ever seen. And I think the thing that matters most is like on the other side of this, people are creating a ton of value. It's not like people are using AI tools and questioning where the value is. Like the value creation is very clear.
Yeah, even in the medical field, everywhere. Yeah. But so who gets richest, who gets screwed, and who gets replaced in this new AI world? And be honest, like, who's on the rocket ship and who's stuck holding the bag?
It's really funny. If you go back 10 years into Silicon Valley, the primary view was like AI was going to displace blue collar labor, truckers and trash people. The inverse has happened. The white collar labor, the software engineers who are pontificating about this are the ones being replaced. If you try to sort of imagine the future, 10 years out, I think there are going to be probably 3 primary beneficiaries of this super cycle, and then a few people that end up on the wrong side.
And how do you define super cycle?
Like a major technological revolution, right?
So like the ones you were talking about before.
The Industrial Revolution, the internet. You could argue mobile and cloud were super cycles. AI is certainly a super cycle, and like I said, probably bigger opportunity set than the internet. But the 3 winners, I think, number 1 are going to be technology companies. Technology companies have just eaten more and more of the economy, and AI is going to accelerate that. And you look at the most valuable companies in the world, Microsoft is flirting with 4 trillion, NVIDIA as well. And so the technology companies are dominating the conversation and dominating the economy. And I think that's going to accelerate. If you own part of those technology companies, you will probably be a net beneficiary. Number 2 are entrepreneurs. And so we've talked about kind of like coding as an example. It brings the skill barrier down. It makes it easier for people to create software, to create products, to find distribution channels. And if you're creative and you're ambitious and you're able to lean into that, it's going to be very easy for you, not very easy, it's going to be easier for you to go from, idea to $1, 2, 3, 4, $5 million revenue business.
Yeah, if I don't need 500 software engineers in India or something, I can do it with Replit, and I'm a creative guy and I'm creating value, then yeah.
Exactly. And then third are going to be like asset owners. I think if you own a legacy business, let's say that you own a business that sells blinds for people's houses, and you have a customer service department and a sales department. If you're innovative and you can really lean into AI, your business is going to get a lot more efficient as a result of AI. Right? You'll be able to do far more with far fewer humans.
And just talking to you, I've had a couple of calls this week with Michael Cole and some AI companies and this and that. Dumb stuff like, look, we believe wealth is more than money. It's financial, intellectual, social, human, emotional, and spiritual fishes. And when you come in as a new member, we want to say, hey, where are you today? What do you want to work on this year? And as you go to meetings and it changes, we want to keep that updated. And at the end of the year, said, hey, this is what you said, this is what you accomplished. What do you want to do next year? I'm sure I could go to Replit, and Replit's like, dude, give me something harder. Like, yeah, I can do that in 20 seconds. I can just do it myself.
100%. Yeah. And it's, I think people with agency are going to do very well. There is the inverse of this, which is like who's going to be the wrong side of the cycle. I think, if you're a mid-level knowledge worker, whose skills can be automated, and you're, unwilling or unable to adapt, it's going to be tough. I mean, you already see this, like a lot of despite Meta paying AI engineers or AI researchers $100 million to come join, a lot of tech companies have largely paused hiring new software engineers, new grads, because they don't need them. Right? They're giving their existing software engineers AI tools, and they're becoming 20 to 30% more efficient, and you just need fewer people. And so I think we're already starting to see this play out where, if you're just a mid-level knowledge worker and you're not able to adapt, I think you have some headwinds to deal with.
But even creatives, so a buddy of mine put in a chat like, hey, go to this AI thing. I just made this song in less than 1 minute. And you hit a button and you hear this song and it's like unbelievable. You're talking about songs, movies, books, television shows being created by a smart person who knows how to work with AI.
We live in LA, and my fiance works with a lot of writers and producers, who work on shows and movies, and they're all terrified about this. They're like, my job is going to be completely automated in 5 years. And this is real. And,
but
I
even
think
artists, I mean, when you have like any author who has 40 books, they've all been eaten by AI with no one's permission. There's all kinds of lawsuits. Singers, like every song that you've ever written and ever sung is there. So some creative person could say, hey, I want you to do a song like a combination of this, that, boom.
It's interesting. It's like you sort of, I'm sure you're familiar with the power law and kind of power law dynamics, where a small number of people or companies capture the majority of value or fame. And if you go back in history, one of the first examples of kind of the power law in humans was vinyl record. Because pre-vinyl record, one person practically could only entertain a small number of people, right? And so you had a lot of localized artists. When the vinyl record came to the surface, you could record somebody and you could distribute that recording across the world. And so you ended up with sort of these early superstars, right? These early artists that people had never met in person, but they knew and they loved and they listened to. And I think you're sort of seeing an acceleration of the power law in AI. A small number of people have way more leverage. And I've talked to people when it comes to movies, for example, and we're very rapidly approaching a point where an actor, Tom Cruise, could be in a movie without ever stepping foot on the set, right? It's like a generative version of Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise will get paid for that, for his likeness, but he will put in no labor for that. And so you get a lot of leverage over your sort of likeness and image. And I think you're going to see that power law dynamic continue to play out not only in investing, but also, and all these categories like film and music.
Changing subject from AI, it's still kind of AI, but you're literally investing in companies that are building robots that can walk, live, think, and probably even kill. So, how real is this humanoid robot future? Like, is this a warehouse helper? Or are we talking about sci fi stuff that really will freak people out?
The reality is people are always going to be scared of, at least for some period of time, be scared of robots. It's like we've been conditioned that robots are bad and humanoid robots are going to take over and kill all of us. And so I think there is going to be like, some fear and aversion, for some period of time. The thing that's difficult to predict with humanoid robots is the time series. I think it's absolutely inevitable that like humanoid robots are going to start to displace physical labor in warehouses, on construction sites, just doing basic stuff, right? Moving materials from point A to point B. And the time series for that adoption curve is like somewhat unclear at this point. I think Tesla with Optimus is the leader in this
Right.
category, and I say that for three reasons. Number one is just like the sheer engineering horsepower inside of Tesla. Number two is their manufacturing ability, right? They can very quickly scale manufacturing. And number three is the AI side of this, and this is really what's changed in the last couple of years that's unlocked this capability. If you look at robotics historically, they were basically rules based. And so if you wanted a robot to, walk 3 feet, pick up a container, and then walk, turn left and walk 7 feet, you had to program every single step. And I remember when I was a kid, I did like, this Lego robotics competition, where you would, program these robots and go to these competitions. And you would literally have to program every single movement. Like I want the actuator to move 6 degrees, and that's just not scalable, right? And so if you have a very controlled setting where nothing ever changes, it can work, but the cost to develop the program for that specific application has always been very high. What's changed recently is a lot of the breakthroughs that we've seen in AI that have led to ChatGPT and these other tools, things like transformers and scaling laws and reinforcement learning from human feedback, all those can be applied to robotics as well. And so these robots are now much more generalizable. And instead of programming every specific step, you can now take a robot into a room it's never been to before and say, hey, walk over there, pick up that cup and bring it back to me. And the AI inside these robots, benefiting from all these other innovations, are now able to sort of do these tasks without specifically being trained for that specific action. And so that makes these robots much more useful. So that's the breakthrough that we've had recently.
And Elon said that, I heard him say that, in 3 years, robots are going to be doing surgery.
Yeah, I think Elon's always been like optimistic on timeline, and that's one of the things that makes him a great founder. Is like he sets these expectations publicly, and then he
Wants
goes
to
to his team and says,
warp reality. Like,
"Yeah," and then he goes to
take a
his team and
job.
says, "Like, why can't we do this?" And yeah, I've heard so many great war stories of like, the team will say, "Yeah, we can do this thing. It's going to take us 6 months," and Elon will come back and be like, "Well, why can't we do it in 3 days?" And then he'll break it down, piece by piece. Like, well, is that the blocker? Like, okay, well, I'll fix that. And then just so he's always been optimistic on timeline and drives his team that way. There are a couple components to humanoids that are like difficult to solve, like the hands in particular. This is like a known problem, and getting the articulation in the hands correct.
And you've said like the key is like if they can go pick a strawberry. Why is that?
A strawberry is a great test, because you have like a relatively uncontrolled, or I wouldn't say uncontrolled, but variant. You have a lot of variance in the environment. Where if you have a bush with strawberries, like they're at different levels, you have different sort of color distortion depending on where it is in the leaves, and so finding the strawberry in the bush is one challenge. The second challenge is you have to apply just enough force to grab the strawberry and pull it off without squeezing the strawberry and breaking it. And so it's a really good test for sort of the dexterity, of the robot and its ability to sort of apply the correct force without applying too much force. So those are really tricky problems. But Elon has said that they have Optimus walking around in the Tesla factories, and they're going to start using them, to automate various tasks in the factories like within this year. And so I think it is happening. And I think it's one of those things that's going to be slow and then quick, where these robots are sort of like people look at them as like a bit of a joke. If you're in a factory and there's a robot walking around, probably does the task a little bit more slowly and maybe a little bit more clumsily than the human does. but they're going to get better at a very rapid rate, just as we've seen in these AI models. If you go back to the early versions of OpenAI's models, like GPT-3, it was kind of a joke. It was like, you could ask it to write poems and it would make a
Remember, yeah.
mistake, and you would ask it to, solve a math problem and it would say 2 + 2 = 37. And people were like, it's kind of cute, but it's not real. And then you fast forward 2 years, and now we have Grok 4 and OpenAI O3, which are like solving, math Olympiad problems and as good as PhDs at solving problems in various domains. And so that rate of advancement was just extraordinary, and I think caught a lot of people off guard. And I think the same thing will be true with robots.
So my wife wants to know like when she can buy a robot that will make breakfast, and I want to know when I can get a robot to give me a haircut. Like, are we like 5 years away, 3 years away, 2 years away? What do you think?
Yeah, my view is like the early adopters for robots are going to be, companies and industrial settings, so factories, warehouses. A great use case for this is like, mining, where you have rural sites, very dangerous conditions. It's hard to attract labor. Your insurance costs are very high. Like, that's where robots are solving the biggest problem. And I think when you look at any new technology, you can't just look at the technology. You have to look at the problem that the technology can solve. And often you have the most market pull from sort of the customers or the users who have the biggest burning problem. And I think that's where the big burning problem is now. Like, having a robot that can do my laundry is nice to have, but it's not like
Right,
it's
right.
not the biggest problem in the world, right? It's not the best
No,
use
no,
case
it's
for
not.
robots. So I think we'll see
Right.
pull there to those early adopters, and then
Yeah.
it's some time in the future you'll have a robot in your house that can, do your laundry.
Well, I think if you look at the amount of people that use pornography on the web, it's astronomical. It's like 40%. I would say you're going to have sex robots before you have any of that. Guaranteed,
I
particularly in
mean,
some of these Asian countries where there's not enough women for the men.
this is sort of the early adopters of technology. You look at the internet; it was,
Yeah.
gambling and porn and other illicit things, and I think that's true. It brings up another issue, which is like the sort of population decline, especially in countries like Japan.
Yeah.
I think that'll be accelerated by AI, and you're already seeing,
Huge.
people develop companions and friendship with LLMs. Like, somebody will have a girlfriend or a boyfriend that's really an AI model that they talk to.
I've heard things that like people would spend like most of their day in this fake world.
I have a friend who runs a company that I won't name
Right.
because I don't know if he's told the story publicly, but they have a tool where you can create a persona with an AI model. So you can explain, hey, for example, you'd say, hey, here's all this literature about George Washington. I want to have a conversation with this model as if it were George Washington. And it's kind of cool for various scenarios like that. They had, not surprisingly, a lot of users like create a persona of like, hey, I want a boyfriend or girlfriend that has these characteristics, likes this kind of music, etc. They had one user who was using this, I think, like 17 hours a day, like nonstop, chatting with this
Holy
model,
cow.
with this AI model. And they saw the usage metrics, and they were like, this is like, we've got to stop this. Like, this is unhealthy. Like, this guy should, like, like, when does he eat? Like, he literally just spends 17 hours nonstop talking to this AI bot.
But there's if you talk about old people, like they
Yep.
die a lot of times because there's no one to talk to. So you could have some pretty amazing applications. But I want to talk about AGI. Are we decades away from artificial general intelligence, or is it another like 3 years, 5 years? And what will that do?
I'm not a huge fan of the term AGI, or artificial, super
Why not?
intelligence, as they get thrown around,
Yeah.
because I think, number one, it's the definition is widely debated and unclear, and it's very difficult to measure. The most generally accepted definition of AGI, artificial general intelligence, is that we have an AI model that is as smart as humans across all domains. So a model that can generate great code, that can write great poems, that can review legal documents. And I don't think it matters. I don't think we need a model that has generalized intelligence across all these domains.
They already do that. They've already they've beat everybody already.
Yeah, you would argue we basically already have AGI, and I think in specific domains, the models are already better than the best humans. If you look at like circuit board design, there's a company that's building AI models to design circuit boards. And, typically the way a circuit board is designed is you have an electrical engineer who will spend a couple of weeks and try out, 30, 40, 50, 100 different designs. And they're optimizing for all these constraints, right? They're optimizing for size, they're optimizing for the sort of exchange of heat on the circuit board, they're optimizing for manufacturability. And you might try 30, 40, 50 designs and you'll pick the best one and you'll send that to a manufacturer for a test and you come back and you kind of continue this process. Well, it turns out AI is great at doing this. And so AI can, instead of running through 30, 40, 50, 100 different models, it'll run through thousands or millions of different variations of a circuit board and come up with the perfectly optimal design that's optimized for manufacturing and size and all that. And it'll do that in a matter of minutes, right? Not in a matter of weeks. And so it's already better than the best electrical engineers in the world at this task. And I have 100 other examples of this across different domains. And so does that same, like, does it matter if we have AI that can do that, but also write poems? Like, I don't think it matters that much. I think in the domains where it matters,
Right.
like AI is already as good or better than the best humans. And so we already, you could argue, have some level of like AGI. And so I don't think it matters. I think the argument around like super intelligence is a little bit more interesting, which is you have these models that can improve themselves. And Meta came out recently. There's some commentary that like they're seeing behavior within their own models where the models are self-improving. And if you have AI that can itself make AI better, and it's equal or better than through the input of the best AI researchers, then you have this like runaway flywheel, which gets super interesting. But I think the whole AGI thing is like it feels like more of a marketing term to me than anything else.
I want to get talk more about your personal journey. I know that before you got to California, you lived in Georgia, and it's kind of ironic that you didn't go to college, but your parents were like college professors or something. So tell us about your family life. And also, what was your first successful entrepreneurial business that you started in Georgia?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I grew up in Georgia. My mom was a teacher. My dad worked in tech, was a software engineer, and I always had, for whatever reason, this kind of entrepreneurial endeavor. And I think it's partially because my dad had a business in sort of the 90s, and like I sort of was around that, and it was exciting to me, and so I think I kind of caught the bug from him. But when I was a little kid, first business I started was a dog treat business with help from my parents. Got a recipe to make dog treats, and I would make these dog treats and bake them in the oven. And my cost of ingredients was, I don't know, like 10 cents per dog treat, and I would sell them for 50 cents a dog treat and go sell them to my neighbors. And all my neighbors were great, and bought the dog treats and probably threw them away, not knowing what was in them, but it was a great little business, and I sort of was able to make some money with that. And then I started doing a series of other businesses. I started like a little bike repair thing in my garage, and I'd repair all the neighborhood bikes and make money that way. I was probably like 5 or 6 years old at this point. Um, and then the first business I had that I think started to actually work a little bit better was making record bowls. And I realized you could buy old vinyl records for 25 cents, melt them into the shape of a bowl, and sell them for like $20. And so
Wow. And where did you get the records?
I would just go to like, Goodwill or places like that and
Wow.
just buy a big stack of records basically for free. And so that I still, I think, better margins than most software companies on that business.
How did you make them or melt them into bowls?
It was super easy. You literally add just like a ceramic bowl shape, and I'd put it in the oven. I'd spray like some acrylic on it, put it in the oven, and it would melt over in a bowl shape. And I actually got them in like a little store in Georgia that was selling them, so I had some distribution. And when I was in middle school, I was in going into seventh grade. My family moved from Georgia to Colorado, and I had a customer base in Georgia that was buying my record bowls, and I was like, well, I don't want to set up a whole new distribution channel in Colorado, and so I was like, well, I'll create a website. I'll sell these on a website, and then people in Georgia can buy them through my website. And this was kind of before you had like Squarespace and the website
Right, right.
builders. And so I was like, well, this can't be that hard. Like, I'll build a website. And that sort of brought me down this rabbit hole of learning basic coding, right? HTML, CSS, like really basic stuff, some JavaScript, and sort of learn how to build websites. And then that took me down this whole other rabbit hole into technology. But that's how it started.
So tell me about PIN, the biometric securities AI company. What problem were you trying to solve, first of all? And how does an 18-year-old land like a $10 million check for a company?
I've got some funny stories. So when I went into high school, my family moved again from Colorado to the San Francisco Bay Area, which is obviously the epicenter of tech. And I was in high school, and I was kind of doing all the stuff you're supposed to do to go to a good college. I played football, I wrestled, I was like the class president, and did all that stuff. But like my side passion was startups and technology, which sounds absurd for a high schooler, but I started off like I had this base understanding of how to build websites, and so when I moved to the Bay Area, I started building websites like on a contract basis. I'd build a website for a coffee shop or a small business. It was a good business, and made some side money. And then I realized like, hey, instead of me doing all the work here, what if I find the customers and then I go subcontract to like offshore developers, and Eastern Europe or in the Philippines or whatever. So I started doing that, and that actually had like more scale and more leverage to it. It was working relatively well. And it was so funny because I was like a sophomore, or junior in high school, and I'd like be in class and I'd like have a call scheduled in the middle of my class, be like, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom, and I'd walk out and walk down the hallway in the corner, and I'd be on the phone with a customer who thinks I'm like a 35-year-old. But it worked well, and we had lots of fun. And then when I was going into my senior year of high school over a junior summer, I interned at a startup. Somebody who had gone to my high school who was like 10, 15 years older than me had a startup. And I met him, and he was super gracious and letting me work there over the summer. And, I ended up like building the mobile app and learned a lot. And it was the idea for the company was like a digital menu platform, which, it ended up not working out, but I was building the software and then like going door to door to restaurants trying to sell them this technology, and nobody really wanted it. And it was sort of the startup 101 experience.
You learned a lesson and applied it to a new idea later.
Exactly. So I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do with my life. Like I just want to build a company. Like I don't care about anything else. And this is sort of, contradicting the path I was supposed to be on of going to a good college and then, getting a graduate degree and doing that whole thing. I was thinking about starting a company before I went to college. I had a mentor of mine who was an executive at Salesforce, and I went and met him, and he basically said, hey, I'll be your first investor. I'll put $100,000 into the company and go try to build it. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, you spend a year and you go to college. It's not the end of the world, but like the upside is uncapped. You could build the next Facebook or Google. The downside is capped. Like worst case scenario, you got cool experience and lost a year. And so I did it. And the first idea for that startup was terrible, which was to build a mobile payments platform for small businesses. So sort of taking digital menus and pivoting to mobile payments. And turns out we were trying to build a two-sided marketplace, and we weren't solving a problem. And it was a terrible idea for a lot of reasons. Fortunately, we very quickly realized it was a terrible idea, and we ended up pivoting a couple of times. And ultimately what we ended on was, we spent a lot of time trying to sell a white label version of that platform to big retailers. And the retailers kept telling us like, hey, this doesn't solve a problem. Our big problem we're dealing with right now is fraud and chargebacks. And if you can solve that, then maybe we could talk. So we went down this rabbit hole and realized there's like this persistent problem, especially in e-commerce and in banking, which is you don't really know who's on the other side of a computer. You have maybe a username and a password or somebody's credit card number, but you don't really know who that person is. And there wasn't a good way for you to verify that. And the whole sort of design or architecture of security has always been, if you want to make something more secure, you should add more friction, right? And so a simple way to think about this is if you want your door to be more secure, you add another lock, right? If you want your website to be more secure, in addition to username and password, you have two-factor authentication, right? You make somebody, get a text to their phone or use an authenticator app. And we looked at that and said, well, that's kind of a terrible user experience. Like, if I'm a good user, why am I getting punished? Why do I have to go through these extra steps just to get into my bank account? And we sort of thought about this from first principles and said, well, there has to be another way to verify that this is an authentic user. And if you kind of think about this from first principles, the device that you're interacting with, a smartphone, a computer, it has a lot of other sensor inputs. So we can capture things like how you move a mouse, how fast you type. On a screen, like on a smartphone, you can see where in the screen you press, where in a button frame you press. And there was some research, some academic research that showed if you look at these sort of data sources, the patterns from a user are relatively consistent. So the way that you type in your password, for example, is pretty consistent. The articulation on your phone, if you look at the sort of accelerometer and the different axes, like the amount you tilt your phone when you press, a number on the keypad is pretty consistent. We said, well, maybe we can take all these disparate sources of data, train machine learning models, and use that as a way to verify somebody's identity. So that if we've seen somebody interact with this computer 10, 20, 30 times before, the pattern should be relatively similar. And if they're totally dissimilar, like that's a flag where it might not be the same user.
Right.
And then you can force them to do two-factor authentication or create additional friction. So the idea was, let's create a way to not punish good users, but prevent the bad users from getting in. And so we ended up building this company up. I worked with some banks, worked with some healthcare companies, did a little bit of work with the government, built these models, built a great product, and made every single mistake you would expect a 18 or 19-year-old trying to build a company to make. And so had a great time and a lot of lessons.
Many people your age, particularly back then, are stuck in analysis paralysis. But you've been hustling since you were a teenager. What drives that urgency, and what advice would you have for people that are kind of stuck?
Good question. Whenever I've developed conviction in something, I like obsess about it and just like very aggressively pursue it. And it's a good thing and a bad thing, I think, in some sense. And this goes all the way back to my childhood, like this idea for record bowls and wanting to sell them online. It brought me down this rabbit hole where I forced myself how to learn how to build websites. And I've just always been, when I have an idea, I'm just obsessed with it. When I made the decision to start a company, like it wasn't even a question of, oh, maybe I should go to college, maybe I shouldn't. It was like, I have conviction in this and I'm going to do it. And, I'm going to obsess over it. I'm going to run through whatever wall is put in front of me to try to make this happen. So I don't know if I have great advice. If you feel that urge, chase it. And if you don't feel that urge, I think building a company in particular is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And you work with a lot of successful entrepreneurs who have built great businesses. And I think all would probably say the same thing, which is it's way harder than you expect it to be.
Yes, it
It's
is.
and
It is.
it takes over your entire life. If you're not completely obsessed with what you're trying to build, you're going to hate it. You're going to be miserable and you're probably not going to succeed. So I think in the context of building companies, you have to be just completely obsessed and just have unwavering conviction in what you're doing.
I had the fastest growing company in Florida 2 years in a row, eighth fastest growing company in the US, 60 offices, 8 countries. But I failed in like 5 other businesses where I raised a lot of money. And you learn as you go, it's a roller coaster of ups and downs. You had said that you think this whole AGI thing is nonsense. And I think this whole work-life balance, the same thing. I am an obsessive like you personality when I want things. And my wife says, God, you're so obsessive. And I said, yeah, that's why I got you. We wouldn't be married had I not been obsessed chasing you. You left me like 5 times. And I had to, call your grandmother, tell her, hey, sorry. It's like, yeah. And I think that people that are successful don't have very good work-life balance. You were just telling me that you haven't spent like 4 weeks straight in LA for, I don't know, how many years?
No, it's true. And, I'm super fortunate. So I'm getting married next year uh,
Congratulations.
to my fiance, and we've been together since high school. And so
Oh my goodness.
she knew me. We were dating before my first startup, before Penn, and so she's sort of always known me in this
We
context.
we gotta teach you some sales techniques here. Eight,
I know, I
that's a
know.
long time.
It's a long time, and fortunately, so she sort of knew what she was signing up for on day one. I think you're right, though. For me, at least, my experience has been when I'm working by building my own company, building Penn or building the current venture capital firm that I'm building now. It doesn't. Most of what I'm doing doesn't feel like work. It's what I love to do, and there are parts of it that I don't like. I don't like doing back office accounting work or anything like that. And I think what I've learned over time is I need to find great people co-founders or hire people and delegate the things that I don't like doing that suck my energy out,
Or a good Replit agent you can build over
or
the
a good
weekend.
Replit agent, a good
Right.
AI tool, and focus on the things that I love. I love spending time with founders. Whenever I go spend time with a founder, it does not feel like work. The fact that I get paid to do this feels insane to me. And when I'm on vacation, like I can't help but you know, text a founder or go read a book about that. Like it's just, I just love it. And I think you're right. You have to totally integrate. You can't have work-life balance.
And when you mentioned that, we use the entrepreneurial operating system. I've used it 5 or 6 times to grow and scale companies. And there's 20 tools. But one of my favorite tools, because I had a strategy meeting yesterday, was you have a quadrant, and on the bottom right are things you suck at and you hate to do. Then you have on this quadrant things that you are good doing, but you don't like to do. Then on the top right are things you're good at and you like to do, and things you absolutely love, and you're probably better than 99% of the human race doing it. Usually that's one, maybe two things. This could be 5 or 6. These could be a ton. And when we hire someone, we have that chart for every single person. And the idea is that every quarter, you're delegating something from your bottom pile to someone where that's in their top pile, because we're all built differently. And if you could just be in the top left doing things you absolutely love and that you're good at, your time isn't being dragged in 100 different directions and sucking the life out of you, then you're going to be really successful. And we reward people on a quarterly basis that are able to do that. You have to build a company that has functional boxes. So you may be the head of HR doing something totally not HR related, but you love to do it and you're good at it because I delegated it from my bottom pile. And
Yeah.
there, and you don't think it's work because you love doing that stuff. The hardest transition that I had is when I had a big exit and I was bought by a public company, and I had to spend 2 years in that public company. I could have just shot myself every day. But you left your entrepreneurial business and you went to Lyft. Tell us what you did there. And then from Lyft, you went to Arc. And how did you design, going to work for somewhere else, being, a young, successful entrepreneur?
When I joined Lyft, I really did it for two reasons. Number one was they were trying to solve a set of problems very similar to what we solved at my startup. And they were operating at a pretty significant scale. And so for me, the kind of opportunity to go solve a problem and have a mission that had, impact at scale was also, I think if you look at Lyft back then, um, and it's still true today, they're almost in a perfect state of competition with Uber. And there was this persistent problem where there was a lot of fraud on the platform in various forms. People using stolen credit cards, people hacking into users' accounts. There were people with fake identities there were kidnappings on the platform. There were all sorts of bad stuff, varying degrees of bad, but a lot of bad stuff. But they couldn't create friction. If they required you to scan your driver's license every time you wanted to call a Lyft, you would just go to Uber, right? And so there was this perfect state of competition that made it really hard for them to solve these problems by adding friction. And I got to know the team there, and said, hey, I know how to solve this. I have a set of strategies that will solve this, and get it off the platform. And so for me, it was kind of the mission of that was super exciting. And so I ended up joining.
Did they accept that? Oh, well, they brought you on because they felt that you could solve something.
Exactly. And I think partially for me as well, I'd gone from high school to running the startup, and we had 25 people, I think, at the peak. And so it was not a huge startup, but it was a real team. And I felt like, hey, if I go work at a big, well-run tech company, which Lyft was at the time,
Right.
I'll learn a lot, right? Learn the right way to build products, the right way to run engineering teams, all these things. And so it was a combination of, this is a cool mission that I know I can solve, and we'll have a lot of challenges. And then two, I think we'll actually learn something useful out of this experience.
And what was it like dealing with people much older than you and you're telling them what to do?
I mean, this is my whole life, right? This is the startup before I was the youngest employee at our startup by far. I had two co-founders who were a little bit older than me. They'd both gone to college and had we ended up hiring a team of people that were older and a lot more experienced and were executives from other tech companies, and so it was sort of the story of my life. And like, it never bothered me, and I think sort of figured out a way to communicate with people.
You have a very easy way about you, and you come across as non-threatening. But then again, if you're totally frustrated because somebody's not doing what you tell them to do, you may not be so nice. But you got
Yeah,
to figure all that stuff out.
you got to figure it out. And it took me years, and I had a great coach who kind of helped me through all this stuff and figured out how to do it. So at Lyft, it wasn't a problem. I'd sort of already had the skill set, the tools to do that. Um, and
And how
so
long were you at Lyft?
I was there for less than a year, and
Okay.
so I joined, and I was super excited about this. And long story short, the two sides of the coin. The heads of the coin are we solved all these problems for the most part. Like we got, I think account takeover fraud was like almost $200,000 a week when I started. We got it down to like a couple $100 a week. Got a lot of the bad stuff off the platform. So built a lot of great technology that solved a lot of these problems. The tail of the coin was my vision of working at a big tech company was it was just like a startup, just bigger, and had like had a better cafeteria and was like more well run. The reality is working at a big tech company was like working 2 days a week and then like going on vacation 3 days a week. It was like very much 10 to 4 culture of like people are gonna kind of work, but things that should take a week are gonna take 3 months, and it just totally different pace than what I
And
was
I
used to.
Yeah, and I was at a regulated public company, and there was a million rules and things that you had to do, and it's like, why? Like, this is taking up a third of my day on all these dumb rules.
Exactly. And it wasn't the right environment for me to sort of pursue my entrepreneurial passion, right? It was great experience. I'm proud of what we did. I like the people I worked with, but like, I wanted to do something more interesting and more intense.
So, how did you end up at ARC? For people that haven't heard of ARC and Cathie Wood, tell us a little bit about that organization.
So Arc is an investment management platform focused on technology. I believe it has 20 to 30 billion in assets now. When I joined, it was predominantly or only focused on public companies, and so we invested in public technology companies like Tesla, Square, Robinhood, Zoom, UiPath, PagerDuty, etc. Um, and then I'll kind of give you the full story of how I joined and what we did there. But now Arc is in the public and the private markets. Cathie Wood, who runs Arc, I think has a very unique way of running the firm and hiring people. And she puts a tremendous amount of emphasis on research and particularly, technology research, really trying to understand where technology is going. And her view is in a traditional, asset management platform or investment management platform, you would hire from a pipeline of, hey, I went to the school and I did investment banking at Goldman for 2 years. And, then I went and worked at, the sell side shop. And like, there's a traditional pipeline for
Right.
finance.
Sure.
And her view was like, the problem with that is those people don't understand technology and they all think the same thing. Right. And so you end up just in the sort of trap of like a consensus viewpoint. So her idea was like, you can't teach an MBA rocket scientist, but you can teach a rocket scientist how to build a financial model. Like, if you know rocket science, like you can learn investing. It's not that hard. That was her whole hiring philosophy. She liked to hire people with deep domain expertise and industry experience versus traditional finance background. And that's certainly true for rocket science and biology. I was covering AI and software, which is less complicated, but I ended up getting to the team and they were looking for somebody to come in and cover AI and software. And I built a company. I worked at Lyft where we built a bunch of AI functionality to solve these fraud problems, and ended up getting the opportunity to join Arc. And so that's what I did. Really crazy experience. And the time that I was there, I ended up leading coverage for AI and software. So I was covering a $5 to $10 billion kind of sleeve of the public equity portfolio. And then a lot of what we were doing was underwriting long-term trends, trying to understand what the world was going to look like 5 to 7 years out, and looking for companies that we thought would win in that world. And we kind of put our heads together and said, hey, a lot of this research is probably more applicable to private companies than it is to public companies. Because in a lot of domains, the private companies are the ones that are innovative and growing
Right.
faster, and the ones that we think will win, 5 to 7 years out. Myself and my business partner Max and we went to Cathie and said, "Hey, we really think ARC should have a private market strategy." And she said, "I agree, go build it." And so we had the opportunity to build out and lead ARC's private investing practice, launched a private fund, and we're fortunate to invest in a lot of great companies. Like I mentioned, we were early investors in Anthropic and Replit and Mosaic ML, and the fund did well. And after some period of time, Max and I looked at each other and said, "Hey, we both have this itch to build something," and we decided to spin out and launch our own firm.
Great. And how's that gone? How long have you been at it? How much have you raised? And if somebody s- um, said, like, what's your boldest bet so far? The one that made other VCs look at you like you were nuts? What would that be?
So we spun out at the end of 2023 and
Okay.
started made our first investment in May of 2024. And our focus is really what we call the early growth stage. So we typically invest at Series B, Series C, where companies have found product market fit, something is working, but it's early enough where we think there's still 10x upside in the life of our investment. And really what we look for are companies that we think are future members of the S&P 500. So 5 to 10 years from now, today they're private companies doing 100, 200 million in revenue, but 5 to 10 years from now, we think they'll be big public companies, sort of the ilk of those in the S&P 500. And we took a very concentrated approach. And so we've invested in 7 companies to date. We'll have about 10 companies in a fund, which is much more concentrated than most venture capital firms. Most firms will have 25 to 35 companies in a fund.
Right.
Um, and so we're taking a different approach in that sense. But so far, we've invested in, as I mentioned, 7 companies. We're approaching 100 million in AUM. Best known companies, Replit, we talked about earlier on the podcast. XAI is another one a lot of people know, which is Elon Musk's new AI company. We were part of the first round of investors in that company. Um, and I think you had a great question, which is like, what is the boldest bet or the most contrarian bet that we've made? I'm excited about all of them. It's hard to pick your favorite
Right.
child, but
Right.
the one I think where we have a massive amount of information asymmetry or sort of knowledge asymmetry is a company called Skyrise, which is in the aerospace industry. They're building an automated operating system for aircraft. And if you look at the problem set here, one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the conversation was this idea that AI can remove or reduce the skill barrier, right? So you can make a non-professional software developer a competent software creator with the help of AI. Skyrise is basically enabling the same thing in aviation. And so if you look at most aircraft in aviation, the problem is the pilot. Pilot
Yeah.
skill is the biggest problem in aviation in the sense that about 80% of accidents in general aviation are the result of pilot error. If you look at Kobe Bryant, for example, was killed tragically in that helicopter crash.
Yeah.
He had a well qualified helicopter pilot. He was an instructor who taught other people how to fly helicopters, but he flew into a cloud and got disoriented and lost control of the aircraft and crashed into the mountain. Nothing went wrong with the helicopter. It was a perfectly good helicopter and a competent pilot. But, situations happen where pilots get oversaturated and lose control. And so pilot skill is the biggest safety problem in aviation. It's also the biggest barrier to aviation. So about 70% of people who start flight training actually don't finish flight training, right? It's a big time commitment. It's relatively complex. The way that most aircraft operate, just to zoom out a little bit, you have flight controls that are manual. And so in a helicopter, for example, you have 3 controls, 2 pedals, which I would count as one control for your feet, a stick in the middle of your legs, and then a stick that you hold with your other hand, which controls sort of your throttle and other functions. And you have to keep those controls in perfect unison in order to keep the helicopter from falling out of the sky, all while you're navigating, communicating with air traffic control, monitoring your systems. And those controls literally are manually connected to your flight control surfaces with push rods and pulleys. It's very similar to the way that the Wright brothers aircraft worked, right? You have manual connection between the pilot and the flight control system or the flight surfaces. So there's a lot of room for error. And like also, if the pilot's okay, but a single nut fails in your control system, then
Right.
it becomes uncontrollable, falls out of the sky. So if you look at the most advanced aircraft in the world, like the F-35 fighter jet or the Gulfstream G700 or the Airbus A350, they have a totally different way of controlling the aircraft, which is called fly-by-wire. And so instead of manual connections between the pilot and the flight control surfaces, the pilots communicate with a computer. And the computer is actually communicating with the actuators and the flight controls and determining how to fly the aircraft. And that makes it much easier to fly this aircraft. It also provides a layer of safety. So if you try to put the aircraft in a situation that's going to result in a crash or loss of control, the computer will prevent that from happening. The computer will say, wait a minute, that's not allowed. You're going to crash the aircraft if you do that. We're going to override you.
And is a company into the market already?
Yeah. And so Skyrise is taking that same technology, fly by wire, and bringing it to the other 95% of aircraft and aviation that don't have it today. And it's an incredible business in the sense that if you look at aerospace suppliers, there are a lot of aerospace suppliers that are worth 10 to 150 billion. And a large part of that is because they have this annuity like revenue stream. An airframe has a 20 to 30 year useful life. And when you equip an aircraft with this technology, you have to buy replacement parts every couple of years. You have to pay every year for software. And if you don't pay for your software, you don't buy your replacement parts, your aircraft is unusable. So you have this great high margin recurring software stream, or recurring revenue stream. And so Skyrise has that and some other characteristics that make it super compelling. So we're existing investors. There's some news about that coming out soon related to the company's progress. They just signed a $600 million contract to retrofit this technology to Black Hawk helicopters.
Oh, wow.
Doing a lot of work with military, sort of bring this capability from F-35s down to the broader set of aviation. So very excited about that one. But most investors I talk to don't understand the aerospace industry. And so they're like, oh, fly by what? What's
Right.
So like I'm a pilot. That's my other passion is aviation. And so sort of the convergence of my two worlds of aviation and investing.
Good for you. So every founder thinks they're building the future. How do you tell the visionary from the lunatic? And what's your personal gut check like when a pitch hits your deck or you're having, coffee with someone in San Francisco or LA? Like, how do you know?
I think the simplest way to evaluate an investment is to look at it in three contexts. The first is market risk, the second is technology risk, and the third is founder risk. I will not take market risk. Market risk is, hey, is there a problem that's worth solving here? If you build this capability, will customers buy it? And most companies fail because of market risk, right? They're building a product that people don't want or need. And so we just do not take any market risk. And typically at the stage we're investing, that's been de-risked because the company has customers and has a pipeline.
Got it.
And we can go talk to their customers and say, hey, what are you solving with this? Like, how much value are you getting out of this? How much would you pay for this?
Right.
So we're able to de-risk market because largely of the stage we're investing at, where companies are post-product market fit. It's not an idea. It's a real business. The second is technology risk, which is, are you capable of building the product that you want to build? Or are you capable of building future iterations of this product? And so in the example of something like Skyrise, there is no market risk. They've signed billions of dollars in firm orders, very clear market pull from customers.
Yep.
They're starting to ship next year. So there is some question around technology risk, which is like, hey, this is an incredible technology, but are you capable of building it? And I won't get into the details, but they've proven that the technology works. I've actually flown a helicopter equipped with the technology. We've done lots of work to underwrite that and get conviction that, hey, this is real and they're beyond that sort of threshold of technology risk. The third is founder risk. And this is the one that's, I'd say, most qualitative, which is, do we think this is a generational founder that's going to build a large public company? The reality is, I think a lot of that is sort of gut instinct and pattern matching. And there are a lot of questions I wish I could ask a founder that feel uncomfortable in the sense that, like, a lot of the great founders that we've backed and that we've studied had some form of childhood trauma that's sort of given them this irrational drive and resilience and all these characteristics. But typically in a 30-minute pitch, I'm not getting into a founder's childhood trauma, usually spending time talking about the business. And so there's some questions that I think would be really useful to ask, but are typically not appropriate for an initial conversation.
But you find out eventually.
You find out eventually. But I really do think it's pattern matching. And I look for a couple of characteristics in a founder. One that we talked about earlier is just obsession. And that's really the most important. They have to be completely obsessed with what they're doing. If you go talk to Mark Roden, the founder of Skyrise, this is really his life's work. And he doesn't have a life outside of this. Like, all he thinks about is flight control systems. And he's been obsessed with it since he was in college. I think that's super important. The second is you have to have grit and resilience. So we talked about building a company is just getting punched in the face over and over again. I remember talking to the founder of a big public company we were shareholders in when I was at ARC. He built a 30, $40 billion public company. And I asked him, what surprised you the most about this journey? And he said, the larger the company gets, the harder it gets and the more stressful my life gets. And you sort of think, oh, once you get to scale, you hire people and then, you can sort of sit back and the engine runs itself. And that's not true.
No, it's
As you
like
know.
that. I was telling you about the public company. Like you got a board all of a sudden that all these shareholders and quarterly meetings and analysts you got to. Yes.
And people problems and lawsuits. And it's just, you have to be resilient. You have to have the grit to just keep pushing. And then the third is intelligence. I think in order to build a technology company, you just have to be smart as a founder. And, I think there are various questions you can ask to sort of, determine the intelligence of someone. But I think you have to be smart, you have to be obsessed, and you have to have that grit and resilience.
You talk a lot about non-consensus investing. Give me like one bet that you made that went against the grain and worked.
I think Anthropic might be a great one, which is, we did that at 5 billion when it was basically pre-revenue. I remember talking to so many people about that, other peers and venture community saying, "Oh, you guys are investing at 5 billion and it's pre-revenue and it's behind OpenAI. Like this doesn't make any sense." And we had a reason to believe that they had a coherent strategy and an amazing team, and the market opportunity was big enough for several winners. And so we had a reason to believe, and fortunately, that was right. They're at 5 billion in revenue now. As I mentioned, they're reportedly raising at $170 billion valuation, just like 3 years later. So that one's done really well. Another one was a company called Mosaic ML, which was an AI infrastructure company. They were building infrastructure that made it easy for people to train and fine tune their own AI models. We had a whole thesis around sort of companies leveraging proprietary data and application developers, leveraging that both in terms of model training and fine tuning. The founder was amazing. He had sold a company previously for several $100 million, and really knew the space well. And we got conviction behind the founder and thought that the thesis made sense. And we invested pre-revenue at about 200 million. That company went from 0 to 20 million in revenue in 8 months, and then Databricks bought them for 1.3 billion 8 months after our investment. So
Wow.
that was, I would say, somewhat not consensus, but ended up working out really well.
Wow. And you've said, that startups have an edge over big tech. Where can like the small AI companies that you're looking at actually outcompete the Microsofts of the world, the Apples, the Amazons who have unlimited resources, compute, and talent?
I think the foundation model layer, building, like training these massive scale LLMs or reasoning models, like the winners have been somewhat chosen. I think it'd be very hard to start a new company and compete there because the cost of talent and the cost of compute is so high. You have OpenAI that's broken out, they have meaningful scale, Anthropic as well. XAI, Elon has the ability to raise seemingly infinite amounts of capital, and is one of the best people in the world when it comes to attracting talent. But then you have the big tech companies as well. Zuckerberg is spending like 100 million plus for AI researchers. And he said that they're going to build a data center that is roughly the size of Manhattan. It's going to cost tens of billions of dollars, probably a lot more than that. You can't start a company today and compete in that regard. You can't compete on scale. You can't compete on talent. And so I think the winners have sort of been chosen for the foundation model space. And that would be probably not a great place to start a company. I think where you can win as a startup is really in two areas. Like the first is pick a vertical or a niche where you can just build a much better user experience than the incumbents. And you can look at verticals like compliance, where it's a big market. I think it's going to grow as a result of AI. If you start a company, you can build a 20, 30, 40, $50 billion company, but it's not one of the three things that Mark Zuckerberg wakes up thinking about. It's not one of the three things that Satya wakes up thinking about. It's probably not one of the three things that Sam Altman wakes up and thinks about. So I would ask yourself that question, like, is there a problem to be solved here with AI?
I think you need to be, you mentioned it, you got to be obsessed and passionate about it. You're a
Yes.
pilot, right? So
Yeah.
I've been writing for 4 years. I hired a coach who has two of his novels or movies. Luckily, I've got familiar with AI and had this 4-year journey, but now they are software programs where I could load my document up. It'll tell me what percentage of it is my hero in, and that it does all the analysis, but it's not built on AI. It was built years ago, and now they're trying to bootstrap AI on top of it. I could create something just for myself, right? To eliminate all these problems and make it super, super useful. I could create an actual company that would be useful to everybody and then say, well, how could this work? Thousands of books produced every single day. Most of them are nonfiction. You have to find something that you are invested in, you're obsessed about solving, maybe for yourself. And then once you've offered it, solved it for yourself, offer it up to everybody else. You got to look at is this really going to scale and solve a problem for billions, or is it just solving a problem for this little subset, you know?
I think there are two different ways to build a company. I agree with everything you said. I think the first is a venture backed business where your objective is to build a big public company. And if we're
Yeah.
investing in a company, like we're betting on the founder building $100 billion
Yeah.
public company, right? That severely limits your scope of opportunities. There are not many businesses that have that potential.
To want to do that is something
Correct.
I've done, but I never wanted to do. And if I had to do it again, I'd rather not.
Yeah.
But but obviously, if you're in San Francisco, that is the culture. It's like going to college and then going to get your MBA. I mean, that's what you do.
Yeah, there's something that's concerning to me, which I'll touch on in a second. Just like as a trend I've observed, but the the other way to build a business is just build a cash flowing business, right? And it doesn't have to be a big public company. You can make a business that spits off a few $1,000,000 a year, and it can be a great business. And the cool thing about AI is the barriers to building that business are so much lower now. You can use Replit to build the software for you. You can use a variety of tools to help you sort of set up your advertising campaign and create marketing content. And so if you have a niche idea where you're obsessed with a problem, you can now build a solution to that problem without spending a lot of time or money. And you don't have to turn that into a venture business. You can turn that into a small cash flowing business and service another 1,000 or 10,000 people just like you and build a great business. And so there are several ways to sort of build businesses. And like, I think this idea that everything has to be a venture backed business is just totally false.
No. I agree 100% with you on that one. And you said there was something else that you were going to say.
Yeah. I think, I got into a debate on Twitter about this recently. And I said, if we shouldn't try to convince people to be founders. If you need to be convinced, like you shouldn't do it. And I think this is particularly, and I'm talking about this in the context of building a venture backed business. I think you can have side projects and, and that can be great. And like, I think more people should try that and it's fun and the stakes are low. And so I put that as a sidebar. But I think if you're going to go raise venture capital and hire employees with the intention of building a big public company and you need to be convinced to do that, it's probably not the right
No,
thing.
and I always, when you have investors, I go to sleep at night thinking, I got to get my ass up early tomorrow. I got to work. I had people that put their blood, sweat, and tears and their resources into my company. And you've done that and you're managing their wealth. They're investing in venture capital, which is very high risk, very high return, but they're expecting, to get decent VC returns. And this is your first fund. So you got a lot of pressure to perform, because if you perform, then they're going to give you more money and you're going to keep growing and having fun and attracting better people. But it puts a lot of stress on you. If you got to be convinced to do it, you're screwed.
100%. And there was the pushback I got on this was there were cases in history of great founders being convinced to start a company. And you go back to, I think like the founders of Intel, and like you go way back in time.
Right.
I think there's a fundamental difference now, which is back then being a startup founder was relatively low status.
Right.
Like you didn't want to go tell your father-in-law that you started a company and quit your job at big tech company. Like it was seen as like a negative and like low social status thing to do. And it was a lot harder to raise capital. And so I think there were some people that almost needed like the social approval, to go and do this. Right. But now what's changed, and this is the part that's kind of concerning to me, is like being a startup founder is now high status and it's a cool thing to do. And it's widely socially accepted. And so now you have a cohort of people, particularly younger people dropping out of college to start companies, often it's like they don't have a problem in mind that they want to solve. And I've met, you know, a ton of these founders where it's just like they just want to start a company. For me, it seems like a kind of not the right approach or not the right path. It's like I just think because it's so easy to raise capital now, for early stage startups, and because it's now in fashion, a lot of people are starting companies, and I think 3-4 years from now, a lot of those people are going to regret it because they're not obsessed with a problem. They don't have that grit and resiliency, and it's like they would have been much better off going and joining a great startup like Ramp or XAI or Replit as
Sure.
an engineer, as a product manager, as a designer. They would have been a lot happier and probably done much better financially. And so I think a lot of founders now are starting companies for the wrong reasons, which is somewhat concerning to me.
Yeah. So, final big one for me, you've already built, sold, invested. You have your own VC fund. You're raising money to invest in exciting new technology. But are you itching to build something again? Or what happens if a year from now you see this massive problem that you get obsessed over and you have all the skills to go solve it? What would you do then?
It's a great question. I've learned a lot about myself in the last decade plus. What I love to do is invest, and I think I like investing a lot more than I like company building. You can think of this as sort of zooming out and zooming in. When you're investing, you're primarily zooming out and thinking about what the world's going to look like 5 years from now. There's some zooming in when you're focusing on specifics of a deal, but largely you're zooming out and spend a lot more time thinking than you do doing. When you're building a company, as you know, especially a startup, you spend a lot more time zooming in than you do zooming out. And you spend a lot more time dealing with some issue with the customer, right? Like trying to hire the next engineer, and you spend a lot more time doing and less time thinking. And for me, I just find investing to be much more intellectually stimulating and fulfilling. And so I'm very happy with what I'm doing now. I mean, we're building our firm. So we are building a company to some degree, but it's much different than building a startup. And so for me, there are ideas that I'm excited about. And my view is like to find a great founder that's solving that problem and back them versus, go try to build that company myself.
Yeah, it's
And
like when you
so
were doing the websites when you were a lot younger, you were finding other people to do it. But you're getting married in a year and you're going to have a startup family, and you're going to see, I have 4 kids, that each child, it's its own little startup company that you, get to build, you and your wife. It'll be interesting. Give you a whole different dynamic there.
100%. Yeah, it's kind of the ultimate startup, I guess, in some sense.
So this has been amazing. Is there any question I should have asked you that I didn't? And also, somebody's watching this and they want to know more about your fund or how to invest. How do they reach you?
Yeah, we have a website, apv.vc, and our contact info is on there. So feel free to email me. My Twitter account is also linked here at WSummerlinAI. So feel free to reach out there. You covered pretty much everything. I guess the only question I would have for you, to sort of flip the
Sure.
tables here, you've had the opportunity to interface with a lot of very successful founders, across different industries and domains. I'm curious if you've seen any patterns in terms of sort of underlying characteristics across those people that really stand out to you.
You know, the ones that were first time founders, we have a lot of second and third gen, which many times inherit something and then they scale it and build it beyond what they were given. But I do find that 10% of the population has this gene that they want to serve in the military. And I was on the National Board of Junior Achievement, been around 100 years, and going to 22,000 schools to try to create entrepreneurs. And they've also found that about 10% of the population, still a lot of people, have what you have, what I have, that they get obsessed and they want to start their own company, be in charge. It's like solving a puzzle. It's fun. So they go in and they train them on finance and all that stuff at a young age. They make them start a company. They compete and they teach them. I find that resilience is a really big thing. I'm not scared to fail, and I'm not a perfectionist. I do get obsessed and I want things to be done correctly, but not to the point that I would be scared of not doing something because I'm going to, I don't believe in failure. And I taught my kids that as long as you learn one thing, you didn't fail. It was a learning experience. And many times when you don't succeed at one thing, it takes you down this rabbit hole where you figure something else out. So resilience has been a really big one. The obsessive gene um, has been another, I think. Many have something that happened in their childhood, like they were 13 and their grandfather, who was like a father, died because they were misdiagnosed. And this thing goes off in their head like, that's never going to happen to someone. And I'm going to make sure. And they go on this path because there's been trauma in their life. We have 14 members that didn't go to college, 9 didn't graduate from high school, and 5 of the 9 are billionaires. And all of those 9, severe trauma. I mean, some of these grew up so poor. About 4 or 5 times a year, they would come repossess the furniture. Father would burn down a mobile home every couple of years to get the insurance money. I mean, that type. One of our guys was running out of an African country. Bombs are going off, and he's 16, and he doesn't see his family for 2 or 3 years. They ended up in Kenya. He ended up with Deloitte. He ended up coming to the US. They don't let the trauma take over them. They respond to it with this just hell. If I survive that, or something goes off in their head like, I'm never going to be poor.
Mhm.
I'm never going to have. Now, it creates a lot of negativity along the way. They're so obsessed, they're not paying attention to their spouse, their family, which creates other issues. But eventually, they kind of figure it out. They also tend to be good salespeople because they're able to convince people like you to convince other people that have other skill sets to join this crazy vision. And there's these crazy emotional ups and downs where, one day you're on top of the world and you think everything's going to be amazing. And then the next day you get clocked right in the middle of the face. And it's like, oh my God, I remember once the power went out. It's like, oops, there was a $6 million trade that we didn't book in 15 days or 14 days. We're going to get shut down by the SEC if we can't raise $5 million to cover this. Like, where am I going to get $5 million in 14 days? But, I can give you, I'm sure you give me lots of examples, but those are the kind, and then you figure it out. You're like, okay, God is trying to teach me a lesson here. I better figure this one out. And then also, they surround themselves with people a lot smarter than they are, and they figure out that dynamic of a founder to work with really good people, listen to them, not drive them crazy, and set up processes to grow and scale so they don't keep making the same mistakes. I've been fortunate to be with a lot of people that have made family their number one priority. They want to create a legacy now, which is great. They have a lot of wealth, and it's like, okay, I want to give back. Like, I want to solve one of the world's most intractable problems and use my entrepreneurial grit, my intelligence to like, why is there so many plastics in the ocean? Why can't we deal with that? So they're attacking these massive societal problems for the benefit of humanity and to heal our planet, which I think is amazing and inspiring. So those are the things that I've seen, but I think there's buckets. There's probably 5 different buckets, and then you're probably a combination of all 5. So there's 20 different possibilities. I'm an Olympian seeker in this model that we've created. Anybody can go to our website, r360global.com, and take it. I use behavioral analytics to lead high performing teams. We're all built differently, and we all respond differently. So if you want to maximize someone's potential, and you got 7 or 8 people on your team, you can't treat them the same. I didn't know that when I was freaking 30 years old. I found that out when I was much older. Also, they have a growth mindset. What don't I know? How can I figure that out? How can I surround myself with mentors? My grandfather said, when you're going to learn to shave, try to learn on someone else's face first. And that's always stuck with me. Like, you can find people that have already made all the mistakes, have them on speed dial and say, hey, I got this problem. I'm thinking about this. What do you think? I've been in peer-to-peer groups. R360 is a peer-to-peer group. I've been in YPO, Vistage, others. So if you're sitting in a room for a day with 15 people and they're all CEOs of companies, and you say, hey, they're not on your board, I'm having this problem. It's like, oh, I faced that 3 years ago. I can't tell you what to do, but let me tell you definitely what not to
This
do.
is what you should not do.
Other people say, look, I got the resource for you, who's the expert that can solve this for you. Surround yourself with people that can teach you from their mistakes. So having this growth mindset where you're always learning, and if I can improve myself 1%, 0.5% a day, be 0.5% smarter every day. And then integrity. People that are ultimately successful, they tend to be good people, they got integrity, and your reputation precedes you. So those are the things that I've seen.
That's great. Yeah, that's I completely agree with all those points.
Well, you have a long way to go, and I'm excited. The next time you see me, I will be able to tell you about my Replit experience.
I can't wait. I will. I'll be one of your first users.
Well, good. And with that, I want to thank you for joining the Fortunate Fish. It was amazing. I think you set the record for our youngest interview so far.
All right. Well, I might have gray hair in the next couple of years if we keep up this pace, but we'll see.
Well, next thing, I got to meet your lovely bride to be when I come to LA.
Absolutely.